My husband left me for a rich lady. 5 years later, I bought his company. The boardroom was silent except for the faint hum of the city beyond the glass walls. She sat at the head of the table, spine straight, shoulders relaxed, hands lightly resting on the polished surface. Her navy suit was sharp, her hair pulled into a smooth low bun, and her eyes held a calm strength that made the room feel smaller, controlled. Across from her, he froze, a briefcase untouched at his side. His tailored suit no longer held the authority it once promised. He had built a life on ambition, on wealth, on pride, but today, none of that mattered. She held the power now. Every decision, every outcome, flowed through her. The company he had left to chase status was hers to steer. No words were needed. The history between them hovered in the air, unspoken. He looked at her, stunned, diminished, and realized the weight of what he had abandoned. Welcome to DEE'S Romance, a space where the complexities of the heart meet the strength of the human spirit. I'm so grateful you've joined us. We know that love isn't always a fairy tale. Sometimes, it's a journey of deep betrayal and hard-won resilience. Here, we share stories that go beyond the surface, focusing on practicable love, self-worth, and the courage to rise after a fall. Our goal is to leave you feeling inspired, empowered, and reminded that your value is never defined by how someone else treated you. If you find comfort or strength in our stories, I invite you to become a part of our community. Please like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a lesson in love and triumph. Now, take a moment for yourself, settle in, and let's begin today's journey together. They met in a small coffee shop in Columbus, Ohio, where sunlight fell through wide windows onto the worn wooden tables. She was reading a finance textbook, notebook open, coffee steaming beside her. He was sketching ideas on a napkin, words tumbling out about plans too big for the modest cafe. Their first conversation was effortless, like two people who had been waiting for the same kind of understanding. By the time they were married, their lives were simple but full of hope. Their apartment smelled faintly of fresh bread and lavender from the small potted plants she insisted on keeping. The kitchen table bore witness to countless nights of laughter, dreams scribbled on scraps of paper, and quiet conversations about what the future might hold. Money was scarce, but that scarcity never dampened the warmth of their home. They shared every burden and celebrated every small victory together. She learned quickly that love required more than heart. It required patience, planning, and resilience. She worked late nights after her day job, tracking bills and budgets, making sure their small income stretched far enough to cover rent, utilities, and his occasional impulsive business experiment. She never complained, never demanded recognition. Her calm guidance held the house together. Without her, he might have sunk under the weight of ambition and expectation. He was clever, driven, endlessly focused on the possibilities that lay beyond their modest surroundings. At first, she admired this about him, celebrated every minor success, and stood beside him whenever a deal fell through or a project collapsed. She listened patiently to his dreams, made him meals on long nights when he returned exhausted, and reminded him why they had started together. She believed in him as much as she believed in the quiet strength that lived in herself. The city streets of Columbus became their backdrop. Evening walks past the university campus where students hurried by, weekends at local fairs with the scent of caramel apples in the air, small parks where they sat on benches discussing houses they could never afford yet imagined vividly. Their love was quiet, practical, and real. It was not loud or extravagant, but it was enough. For a time, it seemed enough. Gradually, though, ambition began to pull at him. He started to look beyond their familiar streets, beyond the coffee shops and small apartments. He spoke of Chicago as a city of possibility, of offices in high-rise buildings where the deals were bigger and the rewards greater. He began attending workshops and networking events, returning home later and later, excitement in his eyes, but a weariness that grew between them. She noticed the small changes first. A quick sigh when he entered, a distracted glance at the phone rather than at her, a brief irritation over her gentle reminders. She never pressured him, never allowed her own frustration to appear. She had learned that love sometimes meant stepping back, holding the space for someone to grow, even if it meant feeling invisible. She continued to stabilize their home life, keeping the apartment warm, keeping their routines intact, keeping hope alive. She reminded herself that this stretch of ambition could coexist with love, that they could still hold each other even as he reached for bigger goals. Their life was a balance of shared sacrifice and personal growth. He became less reliant on her guidance, less present at home, and more focused on networking, investment ideas, and professional opportunity. She never resented him. She only felt the quiet ache of noticing that someone she loved dearly was slowly moving away, not in body but in heart. And yet, she continued to anchor the marriage, offering support without recognition, love without complaint, and an enduring belief in both their futures. Their love, built on hope and sacrifice, was strong. It was practical, tangible, and heartfelt. But ambition, subtle as it first seemed, was beginning to pull the threads of their shared world apart. She could feel the distance forming, though neither spoke of it. She focused on what she could control, the warmth of the home, the meals on the table, the gentle presence that reminded him there was someone who believed in him no matter how far his eyes wandered. It was a love that required patience, resilience, and quiet endurance. She gave her heart fully, even as the future whispered possibilities that stretched beyond their reach. And in those early days, despite the strain of ambition growing between them, she hoped that the foundation of sacrifice and shared dreams could withstand anything. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that love could hold even the most ambitious of hearts. He landed his first major promotion in Chicago, a city of glass towers and endless ambition. For the first time, he entered boardrooms that smelled of polished wood and fresh leather, rooms filled with men and women who spoke in numbers, investments, and property. Everything about this world felt larger than life. The streets were wider, the cars sleeker, the lunches more extravagant than anything he had seen back in Columbus. He brought stories home at night, describing meetings with executives whose reputations seemed untouchable, and the sparkle in his eyes was different, hungry, restless. It was at a gala in the Gold Coast that he first noticed her. She moved through the room as if it were entirely hers, flawless in a cream-colored dress that hugged her figure and shimmered under the soft lighting. Her laughter was effortless, her words confident, and her gestures commanded attention without seeming forced. She spoke of travel, of homes and cities he had only read about, of private events and exclusive networks. Her world was one of privilege, security, and influence. It was intoxicating, a realm he had never imagined but now craved. At first, it was curiosity, almost professional admiration. He wanted to learn from her, to understand how she navigated wealth and power with such ease. He returned home to her, to his wife, and for a while, he tried to share stories of this new world as if it were a lesson, a window into possibility. He expected her to be interested, perhaps even excited, but he noticed her questions were small, practical, grounded in their shared reality. She asked how the new city felt, whether his commute was exhausting, if he had eaten properly. She spoke of budgets, of bills, of their apartment and the life they had built together. The contrast became impossible to ignore. He began comparing. The wealthy woman's world seemed flawless, glamorous, effortless. His wife's world was quiet, warm, safe. He wanted more, not because he was dissatisfied with her, but because the law of status whispered possibilities he could barely name. It began subtly. His attention drifted when she spoke of ordinary life, his admiration for her practical wisdom now shadowed by envy for the women who never worried about money. Meetings in San Francisco followed quickly. The city, with its gleaming skyline and bustling tech events, impressed him. He shook hands with people whose influence spanned continents, whose decisions moved millions. The more he saw, the more he imagined himself in their place, and the more he questioned whether the small apartment and modest routines in Columbus were enough. He returned to her at night, restless, thoughtful, occasionally frustrated without cause. She noticed. She felt the distance creeping into the bed they had shared for years, the quiet shift in conversation, the impatience that now punctuated his words. She did not speak of the changes, did not argue or demand his attention. She continued to anchor their home, keeping dinners warm, keeping the laundry done, keeping the apartment a safe harbor. She maintained her composure while he navigated his internal storm. Her love remained constant, practical, reliable. And yet, he was moving away in ways she could not bridge. The wealthy woman, with her effortless confidence and access to luxury, was now a mirror he held up to his own desires, reflecting ambitions he could not deny. In New York, he attended private luncheons at top skyscrapers overlooking Central Park. The air smelled faintly of champagne and opportunity. He watched the wealthy woman navigate conversations with investors, with developers, with socialites. She never seemed to tire, never seemed uncertain. She existed as someone who could command a room without effort, someone whose influence felt inevitable. And he wanted that. He wanted the admiration, the recognition, the feeling of being part of a world that moved faster, higher, and brighter than the one he had built with her. Calls home grew shorter. When he did return, his enthusiasm for her achievements, for the small victories she shared, was quieter, distracted. He spoke of his new friends, new mentors, new possibilities, rarely asking about her day or the small milestones she had reached. Evenings once filled with laughter and shared dreams were now silent, or interrupted by urgent phone calls or impromptu meetings. She noticed the subtle shift in his tone, the slight impatience in his responses, the way he now hesitated before sitting down at the kitchen table to eat. The wealthy woman became a presence in his mind more than in his life at first. He admired her grace, her intelligence, her ease. He envied her world. He began comparing herself to her wife in ways he had never imagined. He wanted someone who seemed born into influence, who could walk into any room and be seen without explanation. His wife, who had sacrificed so much for him, who had been his constant companion through financial struggles and long nights, now seemed quieter, smaller, and insufficient by the standards of the world he longed to inhabit. He tried to justify it to himself. It was about opportunity, about growth, about seizing possibilities. He told himself he loved his wife, that he appreciated her, that he would always care for her. And yet, he could not stop imagining the world with the other woman, the dinners in glittering penthouses, the parties in rooftop lounges, the respect that seemed to arrive without effort. His love had not disappeared, but it was no longer the driving force of his life. His ambitions had shifted, and with them, the attention and tenderness he once gave so freely at home. She sensed it, though she never spoke it aloud. She noticed the small sighs, the distracted glances, the half-formed sentences cut short by a phone call. She adjusted, continued to support him, continued to nurture their home. Love, she had learned, often required waiting. She hoped he would return fully, hoped that the foundation they had built together could withstand the allure of wealth and social status. She believed in his heart even as it seemed to wander. The distance was no longer physical, it was subtle, emotional, almost invisible. Yet it left a quiet emptiness at the center of their marriage. Shared dreams, once tangible and warm, began to feel fragile. She could see the admiration for the other woman in his eyes, even when he tried to hide it. And while she loved him, she began to understand that sometimes love alone could not prevent change, could not stop a heart from reaching toward something different. It was during one late night in Chicago, after a particularly long networking dinner, that he finally admitted it to himself. He desired the life of elegance and influence. He wanted the world she represented, and the quiet, safe life of their home could no longer satisfy him. He returned home in silence, the apartment familiar yet somehow smaller, the warmth unchanged yet no longer enough to fill the space inside him. The wealthy woman had become a standard by which he now measured his own happiness and his marriage. She watched him, aware of the internal shift, and kept her composure. Her love remained, but she realized that sometimes the heart could not control what the mind longed for. She gave him the space he needed, even as she felt the ache of recognition that their lives might no longer align. The subtle pull toward wealth and status had begun to erode the emotional intimacy that had been their foundation. And in that quiet, unspoken way, their marriage began its slow descent. He called her late one evening, the sound of his voice hesitant and unfamiliar. She had expected long hours, missed calls, the subtle distance that had been growing for months, but she did not expect this. He asked her to meet at the small apartment where they had shared so many nights of quiet hope. She arrived, heart steady though mind racing, and saw him standing in the living room, sleeves rolled up, eyes avoiding hers. "I can't do this anymore," he said finally, voice tight. I need something different." She blinked, hearing the words, but struggling to process them. His need for something different was not about her. It was about him, about the life he wanted, about the woman and world he now saw as the measure of success. She kept her voice calm, her posture composed. "I understand," she said softly, though her chest ached and her mind felt suddenly hollow. He spoke of ambition, opportunity, and the chance to live in a world he could no longer reconcile with their life. Her world, the one they had built together, was no longer enough. She listened, nodding in quiet acknowledgement, restraining the flood of pain that threatened to spill over. She did not beg. She did not argue. She simply heard him, allowed him the clarity he sought, and absorbed the impact without collapsing. The legal proceedings followed, formal and cold. Papers signed, statements given, separation finalized. She walked out of the courthouse alone, filing folders clutched in one hand, keys in the other, the autumn air sharp against her cheeks. She felt a weight she had never known before, a mix of disbelief, grief, and the strange clarity of being untethered. The city, once familiar and warm, now felt both vast and indifferent. Her friends tried to console her, offering words that felt both insufficient and distant. "You'll be fine," they said, "you're strong." She nodded politely, smiled faintly, and went home to the apartment that now echoed with emptiness. Nights were long. Silence became a constant companion. She wandered from room to room, remembering moments they had shared, memories layered with joy now tinged with loss. She cried sometimes in the dark, carefully, quietly, so no one would see. Relocation became her path forward. She packed the essentials, leaving behind the apartment filled with their shared history. The move was practical, a reset. She chose Austin, drawn by the promise of new beginnings and a life unconnected to the past. The city welcomed her, not with fanfare, but with quiet opportunity. She found a small apartment near the river, its walls bare but full of potential, a canvas for her next chapter. Her days began to fill slowly, deliberately. She applied for work, attended interviews, and accepted positions that built skill and credibility. She returned to study, enrolling in night classes, reading, learning, refining herself in ways she had not imagined she could. Each achievement, no matter how small, became a brick in the foundation of her independence. She discovered a new rhythm, a life that was entirely hers, guided by her choices alone. Friends became her support network, people she trusted without reservation, who offered laughter and shared quiet meals. Weekends were spent walking by the river, exploring local markets, discovering small cafes where the baristas began to know her by name. She filled her world with routines that offered comfort and stability, learning to be alone without loneliness consuming her. The city itself became a character in her story, providing both backdrop and sanctuary. She allowed herself to grieve fully, but she did not allow bitterness to take root. There were moments when the memory of his face, his voice, and the life they had shared surfaced unbidden. She let the feelings wash through her, acknowledged them, and then placed them gently aside. Each day she reminded herself that love and loss could coexist, that strength was not measured by holding on, but by learning to walk forward without resentment. The nights were hardest at first. The quiet apartment offered no distraction, no familiar warmth beside her. She learned to fill the silence with books, music, and her own thoughts. She reflected on the love they had shared, the dreams, the sacrifices, the laughter, and realized it had not been wasted. That love had shaped her, taught her patience, resilience, and the quiet power of endurance. It had prepared her to face the world anew, not as a woman abandoned, but as one who could rebuild with dignity and grace. As weeks became months, and months became years, her identity shifted. She was no longer defined by the marriage, by the abandonment, or by the man who had left her. She defined herself by her actions, her goals, her persistence. She celebrated small victories, her first promotion, a lecture she delivered confidently, the way she could navigate the city with ease, unafraid and self-assured. She realized that independence carried its own form of fulfillment, one that could never be measured by the attention or approval of someone who chose a different path. And yet, even in the quiet of her new life, she did not close her heart. She opened herself to possibility, to friendship, to a love that could grow without the shadows of expectation or disappointment. The memory of the past remained, but it no longer weighed her down. She had learned to carry it lightly, as a teacher rather than a burden. In the solitude of her apartment, with sunlight spilling across the floor, she sometimes allowed herself a small smile. She thought of the city she had left behind, of the man she had once loved, and felt neither anger nor longing. Only a calm recognition that her life was hers to shape. That the foundations of her future were not dependent on someone else's choices, but on her courage to continue, to rise, and to embrace the possibilities ahead. Through loneliness, through grief, through nights of quiet contemplation, she had discovered the strength that had been within her all along. The love she had given had not vanished. It had transformed into wisdom, resilience, and the steady confidence to face whatever lay ahead. She began to understand that life could be rebuilt, piece by piece, without bitterness, with dignity, and with a heart still capable of hope. She arrived in Austin with a single suitcase and a quiet determination. The city felt alive, expansive, and filled with opportunity, but also unfamiliar. Skyscrapers and bustling streets replaced the small apartment she had left behind, and the air carried the promise of beginnings she could shape entirely on her own. For the first time in years, she could make decisions solely for herself. She found a modest apartment near the river, its walls bare, its rooms empty, yet she felt a thrill at the freedom of space. Each morning, sunlight spilled over the wooden floors, reminding her that this life was hers to design. Her days became structured around work, study, and self-improvement. She enrolled in professional development courses, attended seminars on finance and management, and began networking with local business leaders. She dedicated herself to learning skills she had only observed from the sidelines in her past life: public speaking, strategic planning, and negotiation. She carried notebooks everywhere, recording insights, questions, and plans. Discipline became her constant companion. Evenings were reserved for reflection and emotional repair. She journaled her thoughts, wrote letters she never sent, and spent time considering what she truly wanted from life. Some nights were heavy, memories of her past marriage rising uninvited. But she did not allow them to consume her. She learned to acknowledge the pain without letting it define her. Slowly, grief transformed into focus, heartbreak into clarity, and the small victories of daily progress brought a quiet sense of empowerment. Work became her arena of growth. She took positions that required skill and responsibility, steadily proving herself capable of handling challenges with composure. Her colleagues began to notice her sharp insight, calm judgment, and ability to handle high-pressure situations without showing strain. Promotions followed, each one a marker of her growing credibility, and a reminder that she could build something meaningful entirely on her own. The recognition, though gratifying, was secondary to the satisfaction of knowing she had earned every accomplishment through perseverance and intelligence. Her social life shifted as well. She sought out friendships with people who shared her values: honesty, loyalty, and ambition grounded in integrity. Weekend walks along Lady Bird Lake became moments of reflection and quiet joy. Cafes and local bookstores offered spaces to learn and connect. Through these interactions, she discovered the importance of community and support. Love for herself began to grow alongside the professional skills she had honed. She no longer measured her worth by another person's attention or approval. Education remained a priority. She completed certifications in financial management and business strategy, courses that had once seemed beyond her reach. Late nights were spent poring over textbooks and case studies, the city lights visible through her window. Each skill she mastered became another tool for her independence. Each lesson learned strengthened her confidence and reminded her that the past did not limit her potential. She realized that competence carried a quiet authority, one that no one could take from her. Over the years, she transformed not just professionally but personally. The woman who had once felt small in the shadow of another's ambition became deliberate, composed, and strategic. Her presence in meetings conveyed assurance. Her voice carried weight without aggression. She developed a keen sense of observation, understanding people and situations with clarity. She no longer sought validation from the world, for she had cultivated it within herself. Despite the success, she retained her capacity for empathy and emotional depth. Her past experiences shaped her into a compassionate leader and friend. She understood disappointment, loss, and longing, and she carried those lessons with grace. They informed her decisions, guided her interactions, and allowed her to navigate complex situations with wisdom rather than fear or pride. Her growth was balanced, professional success accompanied by emotional maturity. During these years, she allowed herself to envision a future not dictated by old attachments. She explored passions and hobbies she had neglected, attending art exhibits, local music events, and lectures. Each experience reminded her that life could be rich, full, and rewarding on her own terms. She discovered joy in simplicity: a walk along the river, a carefully brewed cup of coffee in the morning, a conversation with someone whose insight challenged her to think more deeply. These small moments stitched together a new sense of fulfillment. Her confidence extended into decision-making. She evaluated opportunities with care, weighing risks and rewards, learning to trust her instincts. In the past, she had followed the path laid by circumstance, guided by love and hope. Now, she acted from knowledge and intention. Each choice reinforced her independence, each step forward validated her ability to shape her own life. The quiet transformation from abandoned wife to composed, strategic woman became evident in every interaction and decision. Financial independence became another layer of her empowerment. She saved diligently, invested wisely, and learned to manage resources with foresight. Money was no longer a source of stress, but a tool she could use to build security and opportunity. The anxiety that had once accompanied late-night calculations in Columbus gave way to the calm satisfaction of knowing her future was under her control. Over the 5 years, she began to see herself not through the lens of loss, but through achievement. She understood that love had taught her patience, resilience, and humility. The marriage that ended did not define her, it informed her. Each experience, each challenge, and each moment of self-discovery became a stepping stone toward a life she could proudly claim. She had transformed grief into strategy, heartbreak into discipline, and uncertainty into clarity. Evenings in Austin offered moments of quiet reflection. She would sit by her window, the skyline glowing in the distance, and consider how far she had come. There was no bitterness in her heart, only gratitude for the strength she had discovered and the opportunities she had earned. Her self-worth no longer depended on another person's choices. She was capable, independent, and resilient, and she had proven it to herself. By the end of the 5 years, she had cultivated an inner poise that radiated outward. People noticed her confidence, her strategic mind, and her calm authority. She had grown into a woman who could navigate corporate challenges, complex relationships, and personal growth with equal ease. Her journey had been long and deliberate, filled with small victories and steady progress, and it had shaped her into someone who could face the future unafraid. She had learned that love, even when lost, could teach strength, resilience, and the value of self-reliance. The heartbreak she had endured had not crushed her, it had refined her. She was no longer the woman who relied on others for validation. She had become the woman who could command respect, make decisive choices, and approach life with a quiet certainty. Her transformation was complete, not through vengeance or ambition alone, but through deliberate growth, emotional intelligence, and the courage to build a life entirely of her own making. The email came late on a Tuesday afternoon, marked urgent. She read it carefully, eyes scanning the figures, the reports, and the projections that outlined the situation. His company, the one she had once shared a life with, was struggling. Not failing completely, but floundering under poor cash flow and mismanaged investments. It was a rare opportunity, one her firm had been monitoring for months. She had grown skilled at identifying acquisition targets, evaluating risk, and calculating potential growth with precision. This one, however, carried a weight she had not anticipated, the history of a life once lived. She closed her laptop for a moment, leaning back in her chair. The office around her hummed with the low noise of phones and printers, colleagues moving between cubicles, unaware of the storm of emotions inside her. She had prepared for situations like this professionally, but she did not expect the quiet pulse of memory that accompanied the name of the company, the image of him standing across the boardroom table, or the life they had shared. She reminded herself that she was no longer the woman who waited or depended. She had spent 5 years building knowledge, skill, and independence. Her success was the result of discipline, careful planning, and patience. This was an opportunity to act not out of anger, but with clarity and strategic precision. Her heart might flutter with residual emotion, but her mind was sharp, calm, and unshakable. The initial meeting with her team involved numbers, charts, projections, and forecasts. Her input was measured, professional, objective. She weighed every factor: market share, assets, liabilities, potential for growth. The personal history existed in a private corner of her mind, acknowledged but controlled. She knew she would be involved in the acquisition process directly, and she anticipated the moment when she might see him again. For now, She focused on preparation, gathering data, modeling scenarios, and mapping out negotiation strategies. As days passed, she learned more about the company's position. Revenue had dipped, morale among employees was low, and long-term investors were growing restless. She could see the gaps, the missteps, and the opportunities for restructuring. Each discovery reinforced her confidence. She could navigate this deal not only as a professional, but as someone intimately aware of the company's inner workings, its strengths and vulnerabilities. She rehearsed meetings in her mind, anticipating his likely reactions, his tone, his insistence on retaining control. She considered the balance between professionalism and emotional composure. She could not afford to let personal history cloud her judgment. She had built a career on clarity and objectivity. The thought of confronting him stirred emotions she had carefully compartmentalized over the years. She recognized the nervous energy that accompanied anticipation, but she allowed it to fuel preparation rather than distraction. The first phone call with the company's representatives was polite but formal. Numbers were discussed, timelines proposed, terms outlined. She listened, took notes, and made measured responses. Her calm tone belied the undercurrent of recognition. She knew the company intimately, and she knew the man behind it. Every conversation reinforced the inevitability that paths would cross. She accepted that encounter with composure, preparing mentally for the first in-person meeting that would define the acquisition process. In private moments, she reflected on what this meant for her. She had moved far beyond the heartbreak of 5 years ago. She understood the role of patience, discipline, and professional integrity in achieving her goals. The prospect of facing him no longer carried fear or longing, but a sense of responsibility. She owed herself clarity, honesty, and dignity. The personal history between them could not interfere with the strategic decisions she was entrusted to make. Her mornings were spent reviewing reports, her afternoons in consultations, and evenings preparing presentations and negotiation plans. She visualized the boardroom, the discussions, the positions she would hold, and the questions she might be asked. The intersection of personal memory and professional responsibility was delicate, yet she handled it with grace. She reminded herself that this was not about revenge or proving a point. It was about mastery, about competence, about stepping fully into the woman she had become. When the first day of in-person discussions was scheduled, she dressed deliberately, with precision. A tailored suit, polished shoes, and hair styled simply, yet elegantly. She carried herself with quiet authority, embodying the composure she had cultivated over 5 years. Every step into the building, every movement into the boardroom, was purposeful. She was prepared to confront both history and opportunity with balance, restraint, and calm intelligence. The moment arrived when she first saw him in person since the separation. He appeared tense, the lines of stress visible on his face. He had maintained success for a while, but the stress of mismanagement was evident. The man who had once left without a backward glance now faced a woman transformed by time, by effort, and by quiet power. He was confronted by the undeniable fact that she had grown into a force neither sentimental nor vengeful, yet commanding of respect. She extended greetings, maintained eye contact, and introduced the meeting with professionalism. Every word was measured, every gesture controlled. She was aware of the subtle recognition in his eyes, the slight pause as he registered the transformation she had undergone. It was not about triumph over him. It was about mastery of her own life and work. The boardroom became a place where competence and calm authority dictated the conversation. Personal history lingered silently, acknowledged, but never wielded as a weapon. The discussions moved forward with clear objectives: timelines, financial projections, potential restructuring, employee retention strategies. She steered the conversation with insight, clarity, and precision. He listened, occasionally challenging her proposals, but it was evident that he was no longer the one in control. She had studied every aspect of the company, understood its strengths and weaknesses, and approached each decision with strategic intent. By the end of the first day, she left the building with a sense of quiet accomplishment. She had faced a moment she had feared for years and handled it with grace. The personal history remained, but it did not dictate her actions. She realized that mastery over one's own emotions, combined with professional expertise, created a sense of power far more satisfying than any external recognition. She had grown into a woman who could face the past without fear, who could navigate complexity with skill, and who could pursue goals with unwavering focus. The crossing of paths was inevitable, but it no longer carried uncertainty or dread. She had prepared, she had grown, and she had become fully capable of handling whatever the outcome might be. Her transformation over 5 years had prepared her for this moment, ensuring that the intersection of history and opportunity became a platform for strength rather than a source of pain. She understood, with deep clarity, that growth, patience, and resilience had brought her to this point. The boardroom on the 52nd floor of a Chicago high-rise was modern and glass-walled, overlooking the city that never seemed to sleep. Sunlight poured across the polished table, reflecting off laptops, documents, and coffee cups. She entered calmly, each step deliberate, her posture straight, shoulders squared, and eyes focused. The tailored navy suit she wore spoke of authority without ostentation, her hair pulled back neatly, minimal makeup emphasizing a serene confidence. He rose almost instinctively, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. It had been years since they last stood in the same room. The man who had once commanded her heart now faced the woman who had quietly, deliberately, rebuilt herself into a professional force. For a moment, the past and present collided in the silence before introductions, each aware of the weight the other carried. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and steady. No tremor betrayed the emotions she had held in check for 5 years. The room responded with polite nods, and he took his seat, slightly unsettled by her composure. He had expected perhaps hesitation, uncertainty, the shadow of pain, but found instead a woman fully present, confident, and measured. The negotiations began immediately. Financial statements, revenue projections, and operational strategies were laid out with precision. She spoke clearly, presenting her firm's terms for the acquisition with calm authority. Each sentence was intentional, deliberate, and informed by careful study. Every question she posed was rooted in strategic insight, never personal judgment. The board members listened closely, impressed by her knowledge and poise. He watched her, initially defensive, testing her with pointed questions and challenges. She met each one with steady clarity, offering facts, solutions, and logical reasoning. He felt a quiet shift. The uncertainty he once carried in business decisions was now mirrored in the recognition that she had grown into someone who could handle complexity effortlessly. The woman he had left behind had evolved into a leader whose competence could not be ignored. There were moments when their eyes met across the table, brief, but charged with unspoken history. He saw the controlled strength she carried, the subtle authority that came not from ego, but from experience, discipline, and wisdom. His attempts to regain dominance felt awkward, undermined by the fact that she no longer relied on him for validation or guidance. She had arrived fully, a force balanced by composure, intellect, and quiet power. The discussion continued for hours, each negotiation point unfolding like a careful dance. She assessed risks, proposed solutions, and guided the room with insight that drew respect from even the most skeptical members of the board. He found himself listening more than speaking, realizing that the balance of influence had shifted decisively. The confidence she radiated left him aware not only of her growth, but of his own miscalculations in the past. Her calm authority extended beyond professional expertise. She spoke with empathy, recognizing the human aspect of the company's employees and stakeholders. She addressed concerns with respect, demonstrating that leadership was not only about numbers, but about understanding people, guiding them, and making decisions that honored both business and human dignity. Her approach contrasted sharply with the man he had become, whose ambition had once eclipsed consideration for others. He reflected on the years that had passed. The ambitious man, who had left Columbus for wealth and status, now faced the reality that success without integrity or understanding could falter. The company's struggles were not only financial, they reflected a leadership gap he could not fill alone. She had bridged that gap, silently proving that resilience, skill, and character could overcome obstacles he had underestimated. Midway through the negotiations, a pivotal discussion arose about restructuring and leadership roles post-acquisition. She outlined clear strategies, balancing operational efficiency with employee morale. He found himself silently agreeing with her proposals, recognizing the precision and foresight behind every suggestion. There was no room for argument, not because she dominated, but because her logic, preparation, and calm delivery made compromise both natural and necessary. He felt a rare mixture of admiration and regret. Admiration for the woman she had become, for her intelligence, discipline, and unshakable composure. Regret for the years he had allowed ambition and comparison to cloud his judgment, to erode what they had once shared. She sensed nothing in her words of the power she now held, no gloating, no revenge. Her authority was quiet, professional, yet unmistakable. It was clear that she had reached closure, that her focus was the future, not the past. The final hours of negotiation were meticulous. She guided discussions, ensured clarity on every term, and maintained an even pace. He attempted one last intervention, suggesting a modification that could favor him, but she responded calmly, explaining the reasoning and the broader consequences. He paused, realizing that the woman he faced could not be swayed by ego or charm. Her decisions were grounded in expertise and principle, not emotion. By the end of the day, the agreement was nearly finalized. She had led the process from start to finish, balancing the interests of all parties, while maintaining her dignity and emotional restraint. He sat quietly, acknowledging both openly and inwardly the transformation that had occurred. The man who had left a young, hopeful woman now faced the consequence of underestimating her strength and determination. As the final documents were prepared for signature, there was a moment of silence, the room still and expectant. He looked at her, a soft acknowledgement passing between them, not of triumph or defeat, but of recognition. She had achieved something he could not take away, mastery over her life, her emotions, and her professional capabilities. The boardroom, once a place of shared ambition and distant hope, had become a stage for quiet victory. He extended his hand, a gesture of respect rather than reconciliation. She shook it, firm but brief, eyes steady, conveying acknowledgement without sentiment. There was no malice, no lingering resentment. Only the calm power of a woman who had grown through adversity, who had mastered patience, skill, and self-reliance. He realized, perhaps too late, that her love had been matched by her wisdom, and that true respect could only be earned. As she left the boardroom that day, she felt a sense of closure unlike anything she had experienced before. The intersection of past and present had been navigated with poise, strategy, and quiet authority. She had faced the man who had once left her, and had done so without cruelty or resentment, demonstrating that love, even when lost, could be transformed into strength, clarity, and dignity. The city lights of Chicago glimmered below as she walked to her car, the streets alive, but distant from her inner calm. She had reclaimed not only professional ground, but the emotional space that had once been fragile. The power shift was complete, not in a show of force, but in the quiet mastery of self, the ability to act with integrity, and the capacity to hold one's past without allowing it to dictate the present. The acquisition was finalized quietly, without fanfare. Documents were signed, contracts exchanged, and the transition of ownership confirmed. She had ensured every detail was accounted for, every clause clearly written, leaving no room for ambiguity. The company she had once only observed from the sidelines now rested firmly under her guidance. She felt neither triumph nor vindication, only a calm satisfaction, the kind that comes from mastery and deliberate action. The final board meeting ended, and most of the participants filtered out of the room, murmuring polite congratulations. She remained, gathering a few papers, straightening pens, and checking her notes. He lingered behind, an awkward presence in a room where he no longer commanded authority. His eyes met hers, hesitant, searching, and for a moment, there was silence heavy with unspoken words. "You've done well," he said finally, his voice low, almost fragile. It was the first time he spoke to her without pretense, without challenge, and the weight of his tone carried something she hadn't expected, regret. She met his gaze evenly, serene, composed, offering acknowledgement without judgment. "Thank you," she replied softly. There was no gloating in her words, no sense of victory over the past. Her voice was steady, infused with the quiet authority that had grown over 5 years of deliberate work, reflection, and healing. She had arrived at this moment not to punish, but to witness the results of her own perseverance. He shifted uneasily, glancing at the stacks of reports and the screen still displaying data, evidence of her careful preparation. The company was not just a collection of numbers. It was a testament to her growth, discipline, and vision. His success had always been measured in status and recognition, but she had built something that carried weight in both intellect and integrity. He saw it now, undeniable, unassailable, and the realization left him momentarily silent. I underestimated you, he admitted finally, the words spilling reluctantly. I didn't realize what you were capable of, what you've built. She allowed a small, composed nod, acknowledging the sincerity without offering reassurance or apology. She did not need to assert superiority, for her actions had already spoken. The years of quiet study, calculated effort, and emotional resilience had transformed her into someone whose competence could not be challenged. That transformation was visible in her posture, her steady gaze, and the calm, unhurried rhythm of her voice. They stepped aside from the remaining staff, moving toward the corner of the room where the sunlight from the windows struck the floor. No words were necessary for the history they shared. They both understood the unspoken truths of love, disappointment, and growth. She had loved deeply, had given herself fully, and had been met with abandonment. Yet she had emerged not bitter, not diminished, but refined, strengthened, and strategically poised. He looked at her and saw not the woman he had left behind, but someone entirely new, a presence that commanded respect without intimidation, authority without arrogance. The ache of recognition settled quietly in him. Love alone was not enough to sustain ambition, loyalty, or character. She had combined love with discipline, patience, and intelligence. He understood, perhaps too late, that the foundation of true partnership required more than desire, it required integrity. For her part, she felt peace. The weight of old grief, the sting of betrayal, had long since been processed, acknowledged, and transformed into strength. There was no need for closure beyond the life she had already built. She had moved forward with purpose, establishing independence and professional credibility, and the acquisition was simply the natural result of years of patient growth. The past was present, but no longer a burden. It was a marker of lessons learned and resilience gained. He seemed to wrestle with words, and finally said, I wish I had appreciated what I had, the life we built together, the woman I left behind. She listened quietly, her expression gentle but firm, and replied, the past teaches, but it does not define. What we shared shaped me, yes, but I have chosen the path I walk now. Her words were neither cold nor conciliatory. They were reflective, matter-of-fact, and imbued with the wisdom she had earned. He nodded slowly, understanding her meaning on a level deeper than any apology could convey. There was a silent acknowledgement between them, a recognition that while love had existed, it had faltered without loyalty, and success without respect was hollow. In that quiet understanding, he accepted both the consequences of his choices and the quiet victory she now held. She allowed herself a final glance around the boardroom. The space, once filled with tension, strategy, and unspoken emotions, now felt complete. She had navigated the intersection of past and present with grace, achieving not revenge, but mastery. The emotional closure was not in words, but in presence, her ability to remain composed, grounded, and forward-looking. She had earned her peace without diminishing anyone else. As she turned toward the door, he watched, quietly reflective. He understood that the love they had shared had been genuine, but its endurance had been compromised by absence, choices, and self-interest. Her growth and success were reminders that love alone, without integrity and loyalty, could not sustain a partnership. She had become whole in a way he could not undo, and in that realization lay the depth of his regret. Walking into the corridor, she felt a calm exhilaration. The weight of the years, the sorrow of abandonment, and the uncertainty of the future had all converged into clarity. She had faced the man who had once left her, handled the encounter with dignity, and emerged with both personal and professional authority intact. Her life, carefully rebuilt, was no longer defined by loss, but by deliberate action, discipline, and emotional mastery. The city outside the window stretched into the distance, lights flickering along the streets of Chicago as the evening descended. She paused for a moment, breathing in the quiet, steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. There was freedom here, not the freedom of escape, but the freedom of accomplishment, self-knowledge, and emotional closure. She had faced the past and reclaimed her present, proving to herself that resilience, patience, and growth carried rewards deeper than triumph or recognition. As she exited the building, the crisp air met her, and she walked with confidence. The acquisition was complete, the past reconciled in silent understanding, and her heart free from the weight of bitterness. Love, she realized, had been a teacher, loyalty had been the lesson. And in mastering both, she had discovered the quiet victory that comes from integrity, resilience, and self-respect. She moved to a coastal town in Oregon, a place where the waves rolled steadily against the shore and the horizon seemed endless. The pace was slower, more deliberate, and the rhythm of daily life allowed her space to breathe, reflect, and cultivate a sense of inner calm. She found an apartment overlooking the water, its windows framing mornings of soft light and evenings of quiet sunsets. The ocean, constant yet ever-changing, mirrored her own journey, steady, resilient, and evolving. Her days were filled with work she loved, yet there was room for reflection. She attended meetings with confidence, made strategic decisions for her firm, and nurtured relationships built on respect and shared goals. Each action reinforced the person she had become, competent, decisive, and emotionally grounded. She no longer measured herself against anyone else, and the echoes of past heartbreak were simply a part of her story, acknowledged, but no longer defining her. Slowly, life introduced her to someone new. It wasn't dramatic, sudden, or cinematic. Their first conversations were casual, over coffee at a small local cafe, and gradually grew into longer talks by the water, discussions about shared interests, dreams, and experiences. He was kind, attentive, and patient, not attempting to rush her or fill spaces that were not hers to fill. In him, she found emotional safety, the kind of companionship that allowed both honesty and independence to thrive. She reflected often on the lessons of the past. Love had been real, but it had required more than desire to endure. Loyalty, respect, patience, and emotional availability were essential. She realized that growth could not be rushed, and healing could not be forced. She had cultivated self-worth through discipline, reflection, and careful attention to her own needs, and in doing so, had created a life where love could now enter gently, without urgency or expectation. The coastal evenings became a ritual. She walked along the shore, letting the cool water touch her feet, the salt air filling her lungs. The rhythm of the waves reminded her that life moved forward, constantly renewing itself, yet carrying the lessons of the past with grace. In these moments, she felt both peace and gratitude, for the hardships, for the triumphs, for the journey that had led her here. Her relationship grew naturally, without the pressure of traditional timelines. There were no grand declarations or rushed commitments, only a steady understanding and companionship rooted in shared respect. He admired her strength, her clarity, and the way she balanced confidence with warmth. She appreciated his patience, his willingness to listen, and his respect for her independence. Together, they explored the town, hiked nearby trails, and shared quiet evenings filled with conversation rather than spectacle. The romance was simple, real, and sustaining. She also reflected on her own transformation. The woman who had once been abandoned, who had felt the sharp edges of heartbreak, had learned to navigate life with discipline and emotional clarity. She had rebuilt her career, expanded her knowledge, and strengthened her resilience. These achievements were not only professional, they had been deeply personal, shaping the woman who could now embrace love without fear, without neediness, without compromise of self. Moments of quiet reflection often brought a soft smile to her face. She remembered the years of struggle, the loneliness, and the doubts. Each experience had been a teacher, shaping her understanding of patience, endurance, and dignity. She had learned to honor her own needs, to invest in her growth, and to recognize the difference between affection and genuine partnership. These lessons were now woven into the very foundation of her being. Occasionally, she thought of her ex-husband. Not with bitterness, not with longing, but with the clarity of understanding. The love they had shared had been genuine, but incomplete without loyalty and emotional presence. His absence had forced her to find herself, to grow, and to recognize the value of patience and perseverance. She acknowledged the past without letting it dominate her present. The encounter in Chicago had been the final confirmation that she had arrived at a place of balance, competence, and emotional maturity. Her new life was filled with small victories that mattered deeply. Completing a challenging project at work, mastering a new skill, mentoring a colleague, or simply enjoying the sound of the ocean were reminders that fulfillment came from intention, effort, and presence. Love was no longer the source of identity, it was a companion along a journey she had carefully and deliberately created. She realized that true romance did not require drama, urgency, or grandiose gestures. It was the quiet support of someone who understood and respected her journey. It was laughter shared over simple dinners, encouragement whispered during moments of doubt, and a partnership rooted in equality, trust, and emotional safety. She understood now that patience was itself an act of love, both for oneself and for another. The ocean became her confidant. On evenings when the water reflected the last light of the sun, she would sit on a bench overlooking the waves and think of the path she had walked. Every hardship, every disappointment, and every triumph had led her here, to a place where she could fully experience love without sacrificing herself. The rhythm of the waves reminded her that growth was ongoing, and that resilience and integrity were the anchors that allowed joy and connection to flourish. In this new chapter, she found a sense of completion, not through external validation, but through the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had mastered her own life. Love, once lost, had transformed into understanding, and heartbreak had become a guide toward wisdom. She had learned that dignity, patience, and clarity were the foundations upon which any meaningful relationship could be built. As she walked along the shoreline with her new companion, feeling the steady rhythm of his hand in hers, she realized that she was whole. Not because the past had been erased, but because she had grown beyond it. She had created a life defined by purpose, self-respect, and emotional awareness. The partnership she now shared was not a culmination of fairytale fantasy, but a natural extension of her own strength and readiness to embrace love in its healthiest form. Her heart carried gratitude, her mind clarity, and her spirit a quiet joy. She had learned that love could be deep and sustaining, but only when paired with respect, patience, and a shared commitment to growth. The lessons of the past had prepared her for the present, and the promise of the future felt expansive, gentle, and real. She paused at the edge of the water, watching the waves roll in with steady persistence. She knew she had reached a place few achieve, where love, life, and personal integrity coexisted harmoniously. She breathed in the salty air, allowing the calm to settle within her. Here, she was neither defined by loss nor by past mistakes. She was defined by her own choices, her own growth, and her ability to love with both heart and wisdom. And as she turned to walk back along the path, hand in hand with someone who understood the value of respect and patience, she smiled. She had discovered a different kind of love, one rooted in mutual understanding, emotional safety, and genuine connection. She had become whole. Thank you for spending these moments with me. Every time you watch, every time you listen, every time you allow these characters to touch your heart, you give life to this channel. Your support is the reason these stories continue to breathe. We're on a journey together, one built on love, heartbreak, healing, and resilience. And now, we're reaching for a new milestone, 10,000 subscribers. It's a big dream, but it's a dream we can reach together. If you've been enjoying these stories, if you've ever felt seen, moved, comforted, or inspired by them, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. Your subscription isn't just a number, it's a message that these stories matter, that this little storytelling family is growing, and that we're building something beautiful here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. And thank you for being part of this journey. Let's reach 10,000, side by side.